When we say to young people, follow your passion, are we empowering them or incapacitating them? Or maybe the answer is both. We're going to talk about the importance of place and purpose, and that includes work today and how it relates to raising our kids to love the Lord their God with all their heart, soul, mind, and strength. Stay tuned.
If your desire is to become spiritually stronger, emotionally healthier, and relationally smarter, you're at the right place. Speaker and writer Stephanie Smith inspires and equips you to achieve these three key aims. If you're a parent, you'll also learn how to raise empowered kids, ready for adulthood. Let's get started.
In 1930, an infant boy was born in the state of Mississippi. His mother died 7 months later, and he was abandoned by his father and left to be cared for by relatives who raised him. At age 17, his brother was shot and killed by a police officer, and his family urged him to move away, fearing that he too could come to the same end. He did move far away to the state of California, and he made a vow that he would never return to the place of his birth. But 10 years later, at the age of 27, he became a Christian, and he made the choice to return to his home state with his new family, and he was committed to sharing the gospel. He led the civil rights initiatives for which he was nearly beaten to death. And he began countless programs to help the poor, the suffering, the neglected, and the uneducated. This third grade dropout went on to earn 16 honorary doctorate degrees and became a minister, author, speaker, and presidential advisor. His impact has been worldwide, although he has never been what we might say universally famous. John M. Perkins determined again and again and again, in spite of incredible odds against him, that his work mattered and that he would spend a life carving out a place not just for himself, but for others. He was truly an influencer. He didn't find ready-made places that he walked into. He fought to create them, believing Christianity wasn't just this set of theological beliefs, but it was a way of life, creating places for others and helping the most vulnerable to achieve their purposes. You know, our place, the places that we assign ourselves, that we step into, and our purposes matter. And as we raise kids, one of the things that we will talk to them a lot about is, as they get older, what they want to do in life, what kind of careers that they want to have, what vocations, what hobbies. And we set out as parents when they're very young, hopefully, to start becoming their student, to start making observations about what do they enjoy, what attracts and retains their interest. And we don't want to be too quick to make judgments about that, because just because a kid is thrilled with studying snakes when he's 4 years old does not mean that that's going to become his lifelong love and a career. You don't want to start signing him up for that, when he turns 5. But there is something incredibly important about the places that we inhabit here on earth. I think it's fascinating that in the very beginning, that there's this entire world that God has created, and he's populated it with plants and animals of more kinds than we can even imagine today. And then when he creates Adam, the Bible tells us that he was placed in the garden. It wasn't like, well, Adam, here's the world, go exploring, good luck. No, right? He was given this place that said, here's where you belong. It is both our physical places and the mental and emotional places, the social places that we inhabit, which both reveal us and shape us. One of the reasons that we must prioritize the the human need for housing isn't just to be able to provide shelter from the elements around in an area with weather. It is because having a place has a spiritual, mental, emotional significance to it. It's not just about, hey, let's be protected from the elements. And also, we have our purposes. And, oftentimes those two are very connected. Have you ever heard expressions like, well, that person needs to be put in their place? In that situation, they're not usually talking about a geographical location. They're talking about being put in a position where they fit and they are not usurping and taking on a role, responsibilities, maybe privileges that they don't have. Now, obviously, that phrase can be used to put somebody down as well. But the power of place is something that we want to be mindful of as parents, and not just for the places that we create for our kids. And to some degree, that does tie over into a geographical place. It doesn't matter if you live in an apartment, if you live in a huge house, if you rent, if you own, if you are in multi-generational living. It's not about exactly, oh, I have to have a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,800 square foot ranch house out in the suburbs. But rather, it's being able to create a place of safety, of security, a spot in this world where your kids know, here's where I matter. Here's where I'm safe. Here's where I'm cared for. Now, I understand that it is easy to say that, but the reality is everyone does not have that within their own individual capacity to make happen, because there are economic and cultural realities, and sometimes people desperately want that for their children, but they're not in a place yet themselves economically where they can just go provide that. And that's where we as a body of Christ do need to be mindful and aware that when God tells us that part of our purpose here is to minister just to the most basic needs of people, it's not just always so that it becomes a door to evangelism. It's because it meets a core human need. We can talk to our kids about the importance of place, and also to be able to teach them the importance of honoring the places that they inhabit and that they use. Now, I don't think there's a matter that there's one right way and that you need to make certain that your kids clean their room or make their bed or whatever. There's a lot of different room for style there within that, and depending on you and your home and your kids and all of that. But I do think there is a core principle that can have a lot of application and style, but we do need to teach our children this principle. And that is that they treat the places that they inhabit, that they dwell, that they use, whether that is a car, whether that's a room, whether that's their home, whether that's a school that they attend, whether that's an activity center in the community, whether it's the church where you attend, whatever it is, other people's homes, that they are treated with respect. That does matter. That's a non-negotiable, because when God gave Adam a place, he also gave him a responsibility to care for it. And you know when that responsibility came? It came before sin ever came into the world. He gave Adam a purpose that was distinctly tied to the place that he gave him. Work was not the result of sin. That's right. Now, toil and working in opposition to the earth resulted from sin, but not work itself. Adam had been given a purpose. At first, He was to name all of the animals, but he also was to tend and take care of this garden that God had created and placed him in. The need for human work and purpose is not the result of sin. It is part of our design as being people made in the image of God. We need to have something worthwhile to do. There's an old expression, I don't know if it's still used or not. If not, maybe we should resurrect it. But it says that idle hands are the devil's workshop. And there's a lot of truth to that because people, and especially kids, that are left way too much to themselves. And I'm not talking here about appropriate free time for play and imagination because kids need usually a whole lot more of that than what they are getting. They need a lot of that. But there's a difference between free time and imaginative play and just a bunch of idle, I don't have anything to do, therefore I am going to create or get into some kind of trouble. And that can start when kids are young, and it can go into some pretty dangerous places quickly in a lot of ways as they get older. And one of the ways we can combat that is by having work for them to do. Work is not punishment. Teaching children the value of having skills to be able to do things, it isn't just so you can have them do something so you don't have to. It isn't always just about punishment. There can be a time and a place for that to be a consequence of something. Okay, if you've made these choices, well, then here's some chores that you're going to need to do. But it's not because work is the punishment. And so one of the things that we can look at here is to see that when we are teaching our children to work, and as they grow to have increasing demands for them and responsibilities that are real responsibilities, like if they don't do their job, it's going to mean something beyond, well, I guess you just don't get to use the car this Friday. If a child has a responsibility, a young person has a responsibility to fix dinner for the family one night of the week, that's absolutely an appropriate responsibility to have, certainly when they get into their teen years. And if they choose not to do that and the family is all sitting there hungry, okay, that's a pretty real consequence for that. So what's going to happen? Well, maybe they're going to have to come up with the finances to buy pizza for everybody. I think that there are some challenges that parents face today that were more built into the structure of society when we were more of an agricultural society. And please understand, this is not some sort of false nostalgia. I am not whining here about why can't we all go back to Little House on the Prairie days and we can all raise our own animals and our own livestock and have our own gardens and all that. I'm not knocking that. I've got some family members that very much are into and want to do homesteading and those types of things. I grew up on a farm. I know what it is to raise a garden, not just for fun, but for food that kept us throughout the winter. I know what it is to raise livestock. I'm not making fun of that. I'm just recognizing that as a mass culture here in the U.S., we're not going back to those days. But one of the values when we did have a more dominant agricultural culture is that the reality of the impact of work was far different than what it is now. If a person didn't go out and milk the cows, well, if that happens, just in case you don't know, maybe you're not up on, how milk cows work. Well, here's the thing. If you don't go out and milk a cow on schedule, that milk doesn't just disappear. What happens is you can actually end up causing tremendous pain and distress in that cow, and it could even lead to their death. If animals weren't given water, and that might mean in the wintertime going down and breaking the ice on the pond so they could get to a water source. The consequences of not following through on that responsibility were usually measured in a fairly short period of time and they were real consequences with tangible results. If you didn't go out and pick the green beans when they were ripe, and then you waited too long and the bugs ate them up or they started to shrivel up, and you knew that that was going to be part of your food supply for the rest of that year until the next year's harvest, then you could see the consequences of not following through on that pretty quick. Unfortunately, honestly, it's hard for us to come up with things as parents now that duplicate that in the kind of work that we usually have available for our kids. I mean, let's just be honest. If they forget to roll the trash can out to the curb, nobody's going to die. An animal in the neighborhood is not going to fall over in pain and start crying out in distress. And this is where I encourage parents to be more proactive, to come up with work. So yeah, it might take more work on your part, but to come up with activities all as your kids are growing up that are meaningful activities that they can engage in, that have a real connection to needs and desires, not just for them, but for other people. One of the greatest ways that we can fulfill that first great commandment to love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength is through work that we do. Whether that's paid work that's professional, or whether that is volunteering, whether that is serving at home as a stay-at-home parent, it is caring for family members who might be aging parents, or it might be someone, a spouse or children who have special needs. All work has significance because work is something that God has hardwired into us to have a need to do. Now, just like everything else that God designed, sin has a way of wanting to destroy, to thwart everything that God has designed. And that shows up in our kids. Some of you might be listening to this and going, this whole hardwired into us that we have a desire to work. I don't know about you, but I am looking at my kids right now, and they are stretched out on the sofa and on the floor, and they are staring at their screens. And I don't see in them like some big desire to work. Well, I understand that because like everything else, we have this sinful nature that we have to contend with. And so this has to be part of resurrecting within us and making the decisions and the discipline so that we do work that we need to do, not just for survival, but it is to fulfill part of how we have been designed. And just like I talked about in the beginning with this example of John Perkins, it's also about using our skills and doing our work and our purpose to create places for other people, whether that are places of homes and shelters, whether those are places of safety, whether those are places where kids can gather in communities to participate in athletics or book clubs or whatever in healthy activities in a safe environment, whether it is to create educational places, schools and resource centers, places of health and medicine. Our purposes are very much tied to our places. And I think that if we use language for this with our kids, then it's not just about, what career do I want to go into? It's about saying, what is the place that I want to inhabit? And what are the places that I want to create for others? And how does that relate to the purpose that I have? And the purposes that I want to help empower other people to walk out. On average, people will spend around 90,000 hours of their life working in paid employment. How we train our children to view work, not just the kind that they eventually choose to go into, but how we help to frame their thinking about even the nature of work, and that it's not this drudgery that we have to drag ourselves through as a result of sin. Rather, it predates sin. It goes back to living out that creative, productive, meaningful part of us that is designed in the very image of God. And where that might start in a very practical way is also tied to place. Maybe it's saying, you know what? I think that in order for them to learn to honor the places in their lives and to see that those are things to steward, yeah, okay, you know what? They need to start being responsible to clean their room once a month, or they can go out once a week and they can help clean out the car, or they can wash the car, or they can help go clean up the toys in the yard, or they can go mow the yard, or whatever it is in all these different areas. Sometimes it's easy to think about when we talk about things like fulfilling the first great commandment, and we can get kind of carried away with thinking these big lofty thoughts of how we need to be all emotional about this, and that looks like going into quote full-time ministry, and that looks like preaching the gospel. But you know what? Here's the thing. The gospel is about how we show up in every single aspect of life. And that includes living out the appreciation that we have in the most even mundane, if I can put it that way, ordinary places and responsibilities that we have in life. Sometimes as Christian parents, we do our children a tremendous disservice, and we can set them up for a certain type of failure, or we can set them up for a certain type of arrogance, because we can talk so much in these lofty ideas and phrases about how they're going to go win the world for Christ. And we can talk about these types of things, about all these great things that they're going to go out and accomplish either as an individual or as a generation for Christ. And sometimes where we need to start is they just kind of need to learn to clean their room, because life comes down to those types of specific practical actions as well. And a kid who doesn't have the humility and the willingness to clean their room really doesn't need to be focusing so much on, hey, how am I going to go out and help people on the other side of the state or the planet to come to know Christ, if I can't even go over there and pick up my dirty socks and go put them in the hamper, or go put them in the wash machine and clean them. Sometimes we can get so caught up in the theology of Christianity that we minimize the importance of how we just show up in everyday life in some of these more kind of earthy kind of ways and kinds of things. But it is often in these earthy kinds of things, like how we take care of our places, how we show up with our purposes, that shape the character and the traits that we have that enable us to actually go out then into the world and to accomplish things of great significance, because we have learned to first be faithful in the small things. All right, that is going to wrap us up here for today. If you haven't already, I want you to go to the website, stephaniepresents.com. Sign up for the weekly newsletter, High Impact. One of the things that I do in there is I give other information about, let you know about upcoming podcasts and that type of thing. But I also usually every week, I will link to another resource that can help you as an individual or as a parent. And this can range from everything. Recently, it's been books. I also link to a program that parents can look at to help with their older kids to assess what their particular skill sets are and their bents. The Working Genius program that can help kids to make decisions so they don't end up wasting a bunch of time pursuing education or career paths that they're just not really suited for. but rather to identify those things that they are best suited for. So there's a whole wealth of different resources on there, and it provides us a way to stay connected. Also, share this podcast with at least 2 other people. Let them know about it. Send them an email, send them a text, give them an old-fashioned phone call. People still do that sometimes. You could even go really old school and like write a letter that you could actually drop in the mail. But however you do it, it's probably easier just to send a little link and say, hey, I've been listening to this podcast and I want to share it with you. I think it would be something that you might find enjoyable as well. All right, my friend, thank you for tuning in. I look forward to being back with you next week. In the meantime, remember this: you have an impact that is immeasurable, eternal, and irreplaceable. Have a great week.
Thank you for listening. Visit the website stephaniepresents.com and sign up for High Impact to join the mission of building spiritually strong, emotionally healthy, and relationally smart women and families. You can also book Stephanie to speak at your event and check out additional resources. Together, we can invite and equip generations to engage fully in God's grand story.